President Obama wrapping up his final State of the Union, coming in just under an hour. The President laying out 4 big questions he wants the American people to answer in the future, hitting many different notes. His most impassioned when he said that America spoke out against the idea that America's gotten weaker on his watch. Most humble when he talked about his regrets. His regret that the rancor and suspicion between the parties has only grown while he is in office. And you just saw him right there. His most emotional when he talked about those Americans who inspire him every day and make this America strong. I want to go to John Carl, who's in the chamber right there by where the president was speaking. One other aspect of this speech, John, the president said it would be different. One thing that seemed to be different here watching it on television, I wonder what it felt like in the room. Not a lot of tension in that hall, perhaps up until the end.
It was remarkably subdued in this hall. I've been here for almost all of the President's State of the Union addresses, and this one by far seemed the most subdued. There wasn't a lot of tension, you're right. There was much less in the way of specifics. That's probably a big part of it. But also, the applause lines were quieter, in large part because there are simply fewer Democrats, and most of the applause, as it is often in these State of the Union addresses, came solely from the president's party, and there simply are fewer of them. But there was one really interesting moment, George, that I thought was directly aimed at this presidential race, and that's when the president said, we need to reject any politics that targets people because of race or religion. At that moment, you saw Paul Ryan stand up to applaud, and you saw a significant amount of applause on the Republican side of the aisle. And to me, watching that seemed to be a message from some of these Republicans to the current frontrunner in the Republican race, Donald Trump.
There was a lot of applause for that line as the president went down and seemed to call out Mr. Trump, not by name, but more specifically on his calls to ban Muslims. The crowd got a little bit quieter. Not surprisingly, perhaps, we've already seen a response from Donald Trump on a tweet. He said he found the State of the Union speech really boring, slow, lethargic, very hard to watch. But David Muir, World News anchor David Muir, as John Carl just said right there, a couple of places where the president stepped right up to the line of naming Donald Trump, clearly stepped out and called out his politics.
No question, George. In fact, when you heard the president say when a politician insults Muslims, when mosques are vandalized, that doesn't make us safer as a country. It's just wrong. He said it makes us weaker in the world. And just to pick up on something that struck you, George, as well, was that moment in the room when he was addressing not only the millions of Americans watching tonight, but lawmakers on both sides of the aisle in that room, when he said, one of the few regrets of my presidency is that the rancor and the suspicion has gotten worse rather than better. And he went on to talk about being trapped by your base. I found that very interesting, that in talking, particularly during this political season, about the politics of extremism in this country, saying, the only way to get out of being trapped by your base is to do something about it yourself. So at least that part of the State of the Union seemed directly aimed at both Republicans and Democrats in that hall.
Echoes there, David Muir, of the president's speech, the speech that brought him on the national stage back in 2004 when he was the keynoter for John Kerry at the Democratic Convention. I want to go to Donna Brazile with that notion. You've been following this president for a long time, Donna Brazile, supporting this president for a long time, and this was wrapping up many of the themes of his campaigns and his presidency.
George, I thought his speech embodied just the vision that he laid out back in 2004, the determination as a president in 2009 to change our politics, to come to Washington, D.C., to actually fix things. And the president who decided that, there was so much he could do with Congress, but rather he went ahead and began to fight for the American people, turning the economy around, health care, so millions of Americans now have access to it. I thought his speech, the tone, the delivery, the style, it was really exciting. A good exclamation point for 7 great years. And one last thing, George, the president tonight said he's not finished. He's going to continue to fight, and he's going to start by trying to fix our politics. I also like that approach as well.
Not sure what's going to happen over the next several months before the election, but Hugh Hewitt, before I go to our panelists here in the studio, you'll be on the radio this morning, tomorrow. You'll be hearing from your listeners, Republican, conservative listeners. What are they going to take away from this?
Some unworldliness. My friend Don and I heard different speeches. When the president said the Cold War wasn't over, I was thinking of the people in Crimea, and when the president talked about Vietnam and Iraq being the same, I thought of the status of forces agreement he didn't achieve. And he did not mention our 10 sailors held captive in Iran tonight. I'm actually kind of perplexed, George, by this speech. And subdued is probably the reaction you get when a lot of people look at a man who might have been a great president and say so much was not accomplished because he chose the road of division that he himself denounced tonight.
Otherworldly from Hugh Hewitt, Matthew Dowd. As we said at the top of the show, 70% of Americans think we're going in the wrong direction. Did the president do anything tonight to move that needle?
I don't think he moved anybody, as in his words, on either side of the tribes in the course of this country right now. The folks that believe that the country is off on the wrong track aren't going to accept those words, and the folks that love him are going to love his speech in the course of this. I think the problem he has, the thing he mentioned at the end, still exists that started his presidency and ends his presidency, which political rancor and conflict and discord is worse now, as he admitted, than it's ever been before, and that speech is not going to fix that.
And America, in many ways, at the end of his presidency, the final year, Mark Raddatz, still mired in conflicts overseas. Again, as I said, the president seems so impassioned when he spoke against that idea that America is weaker and had that direct challenge to Congress. And also said, if you feel so strongly about this, give me an authorization to use force.
And that authorization of military force, you'll hear Republican Speaker Ryan said to a group of reporters this morning that it didn't have what was necessary in his AUMF draft because he didn't talk about committing large ground forces, and they thought that would tie the hands of his successor. Also, talking about ISIL, when he said the over-the-top claims that this is World War III just play into their hands. He was trying to walk that line tonight between taking it seriously and not scaring people. The problem is he has underestimated ISIS.
But that's what I was going to ask you about. How about a reality check on the various markers of progress he said we've been making overseas in Iraq and Syria over the last year?
There are certainly markers of progress, but when he talks about those pickup trucks and he talks about the groups of ISIS running around in those pickup trucks don't threaten our national existence, well, those men in pickup trucks tonight still are in charge of Mosul in Iraq. They still are in charge of huge swaths in Syria. Yes, there's progress. But there's not enough progress yet, and you still have those large swaths of the country and safe havens for ISIS right now.
And Pierre Thomas, you covered the issue of Homeland Security. The president also knows that another attack of some sort is likely.
Well, in fact, when you have ISIS sending out 90,000 messages a day, and they know many of those are coming inside the United States, it's a current and imminent threat. The FBI has roughly 900 terror investigations underway right now. Many of those involve ISIS.
Koki, the president did seem legitimately humbled by his failure here. Didn't use the word failure, used the word regret, but that failure to fix our politics.
And said maybe a Lincoln or Roosevelt could have, and actually
setting a pretty high bar there.
Right. But also they couldn't in their time either, if the truth be told. But look, his basic theme was we're strong because we're diverse. We're strong because we can accept change. The change is only going to accelerate, and we have to grab hold of it and do what America has always done, which is to go forward with it and embrace it. And that is very different from what we've been hearing on the campaign trail.
And on the campaign trail, John Carl, the president says he's going to stay out of the Democratic primary fight, but he seemed to be itching to get into the general election fight.
He sure did, George. And I loved the line at the very beginning, promising he was going to make it a short speech, because I know some of you are antsy to get back to Iowa. And in fact, there are 4 senators that are running for president. Only 2 of them managed to make it here to this speech today. The others out campaigning. But Marco Rubio was on the floor, Bernie Sanders on the floor. And I think this president is very much geared up, or as he might say, fired up and ready to go for the next campaign.
You could feel it, you could see it in the speech.